ba ma dalee commencé liggéey bi yokkute bu bari am nañ ko ci.
You're watching the Daily Climate Show here on Sky News. Coming up on today's programme, a multi-billion-dollar effort to tackle climate change in the US is passed by Republicans and Democrats. Deforestation in Brazil rises by 22% in 12 months, with more than 13,000 square kilometres of rainforest lost. And Egypt is urged to lead the fight against climate change as the royals end their tour of duty. Hello there, welcome to the UK's only daily climate news show where we track the changes happening to our world right now and we challenge those coming up with the solutions. Our top story tonight, it is the biggest environmental investment in US history, $555 billion US dollars, part of the $1 trillion infrastructure bill. And today it's finally been passed in the United States House of Representatives. The climate portion of the bill includes incentives for shifting to clean energy for consumers, coastal restoration and forest management, and was a big part of Joe Biden's Build Back Better initiative at COP26 in Glasgow. Its next step, making it through a divided Senate before it can reach the president's desk. But for now, it is a moment of celebration on the Capitol.
The yeas are 220, the nays are 213. The Build Back Better bill is passed.
Let's go straight to Washington, join our correspondent Joe Pike. Joe, it is a huge amount of money, isn't it? What sort of impact will it have?
Well, none quite yet, because as you say, Jonathan, it does need to get through the Senate and it's likely to be watered down. Currently, the price tag is $2 trillion, with $500 billion being spent on the climate. If it does get through the Senate, we will see investment in trying to get the economy to move away from fossil fuels and move in industries like the automotive sector towards electrifying electric cars. But it is a real challenge coming up next for Joe Biden and his Democrat colleagues, because the Senate is split 50-50. He does need one particular senator on board, Joe Manchin, a Democrat of West Virginia, who is leaning to the centre. He's not one of the sort of progressives. He is more centrist. I suppose Blairite is maybe how you describe it in the UK terms, although it is, of course, entirely different. And he is facing an election in the next year or so. He wants to keep his job, and he represents coal country. Therefore, I'm sure he'll want to water down certainly some of the climate element of this $2 trillion package. But certainly Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi are taking the win today. This is one of the two big pieces of legislation that are at the heart of Joe Biden's presidency. One of them on infrastructure has already been passed. This is the second, more complex, more difficult one. It's not just about the climate, but about social welfare and the health system too. But it's got through a very important step, Jonathan, and all eyes on the Senate now to see what happens there.
OK, we'll wait and see. Joe, thank you very much. Joe Pike in Washington there. Well, let's take a look at the data dashboard, shall we? Here is the power mix in Great Britain at the moment. Gas makes up 43.9%. Coal is on 2.7% today. Renewables 26% and nuclear 13.9%. The number down here at the bottom shows the global CO2 emissions right now. And as you can see, that number ticking up all the time. Well, to counter the release of those emissions, it is essential that the world's rainforests are protected because they act as a carbon sink, absorbing carbon dioxide. But today, new research shows that the rate of deforestation in the Brazilian Amazon is at its highest in 15 years.
It's a huge challenge. We need to address it. We are First thing, we recognize that we have a problem in terms of deforestation, and we are acting in order to solve this problem. We as a developing country, we need resources, investment. We are a G20 member country, as you said, but we still have our difficulties.
Let's take a look at some of today's other climate news. And an Indian power company will start building a coal mine in Botswana in 2022, which could produce 4.5 million tonnes of coal every year. It comes as Botswana announced renewable energy in the country could increase to 18% from 2% over the next 20 years. 43 beaches in South Korea are suffering from serious coastal erosion, according to a survey by the Oceans and Fisheries Ministry. That's up from 12 beaches in 2018. Rolls-Royce's battery-powered plane has smashed the fastest all-electric flight world record. The Spirit of Innovation aircraft reached a top speed of 345 miles an hour, over 3 kilometres. Rolls-Royce Chief Executive Warren East called the flight a milestone towards making Jet Zero a reality. Now, the Prince of Wales and Duchess of Cornwall have ended their tour of Egypt. It was their first visit in 15 years, and it comes, of course, less than 12 months before the country hosts COP27. While the Queen rests in Windsor Castle, Prince Charles has taken on a leading royal role. The couple met artists, filmmakers and the founder of Banlastic Egypt, driving a ban on single-use plastic. While the royals were visiting Alexandria, one of the cities vulnerable to rising sea levels caused by the climate crisis. The princes used the tour of Egypt to really keep up momentum created by COP26, urging world leaders to take action in the fight against climate change and protect some of the treasured wonders of the world. Sky's royal correspondent Rhiannon Mills has been travelling with them and sent this report about the future king and his environmental activism.
Putting on a good performance is a big part of these tours. Prince Charles and Camilla nothing but willing as they arrived in Alexandria. And it has been a week where there has been more focus, especially on him after the Queen pulled out of Remembrance Sunday because she was unwell.
Although 100 years is a fair old age, I could only say, like Shakespeare, that to me, fair friend, you never can be old. And look forward to the next century of our friendship. Wa tastamir al-Masira.
Now the most senior of the family to travel. He may not have the title yet, but still receives the same welcome as any other head of state. Regarded by the UK government as a man that leaders will listen to. Royal tours are a tried and tested model for soft diplomacy, but there's no doubt that for some time he's been doing it differently from his mother. A man who has a forthright determination to bring different faiths together and the most strident, some would say not entirely politically neutral views on addressing the climate crisis.
Prince Charles is going to have to walk that very fine line between representing the Queen but also wanting to assert himself and his own position. And as he gets closer to the throne, the challenge to walk that tightrope becomes ever greater.
He was in his element, surrounded by tradition at the Biblioteca, a revival of the ancient Great Library of Alexandria.
What a beautiful day.
Some would argue a new era would deserve a new approach. A palace source once told me that when you're monarch, you can be, but as heir, you have to do. And if the Prince of Wales didn't do anything, then he would be criticised. Of course, there are those who think in the past that he has overstepped the mark, but he has addressed that by saying that in the future, he will not be a meddling monarch. For all of the show, not everything has gone to plan. A visit to HMS Queen Elizabeth cancelled, and questions about his charity rumbling on back home. Over the years, he has developed very thick skin, and one thing never in doubt, he's always known what is expected. Rhiannon Mills, Sky News in Alexandria.
Well, we'll be discussing more on Prince Charles's campaign to tackle climate change and the role of high-profile figures after the break. I'll be joined from Glasgow by Laura Young, a climate activist and environmental scientist, and by Michael Jacobs, Professor of Political Economy at Sheffield University. Join us all in a couple of minutes.
So one of the works here behind me, these are fingerprint details, moulds sculpted from the surface of, this one's from the Mer de Glace, one of the most iconic glaciers in Europe, if not the world. And I travel up to the glacier, I take a mould from the surface of the ice, spend the night on the glacier, hearing it carving, cracking, the sounds are phenomenal. And I take a fingerprint mould, I take it back to the workshop, to the studio, and then here they're cast in bronze. And then once they're set in bronze, they become that permanent reminder of our engagement with our landscape. Climate change, climate crisis, our engagement with our landscape is one of the most significant, well, the most significant, aspect to the work that I'm creating. Like I say, these pieces, Kay, they're there to set as a reminder on how we engage with our landscape. And they act to a certain extent as like a memento mori. No longer do we have a skull sat on our desk to give us and remind us that death is written into the contract of life. These work now as glaciers instead, because every day you walk past, you can see them here. It gives you that reminder and subtle nod to, that your engagement is really important. The idea is that I'm capturing this transient, powerful force, which etches its way through the mountains that we now inhabit and acts as this permanent reminder for us as to how we deal with our beautiful mountains, beautiful landscape. And it's kind of here, and now it's tranquil, it's still, and it will last forever. Like on the back of each one of the sculptures is the GPS coordinates from where this actual piece comes from the glacier, which is now melted, eroded, and lost. So in 50 years, 100 years time, 200 years time, you can type in the coordinates, the internet will do its thing, and you'll see that the glacier is no longer there. However, you're left with this permanent reminder.
Our job is to tell the truth.
This is a forgotten front line. They are dying here.
Here it comes. Cut.
Boy, have we got some interesting ways of showing you what's going on.
Their message to us, get ready.
Something like apocalypse.
Instructing you to stay at home.
I can't believe we did that.
It's pretty special, isn't it?
Did you know that driving us to school creates extra toxic air at drop-off and pick-up times?
A band of rain will move south on Saturday, heralding a change to much colder conditions. Much of England and Wales will be dry and mild, if rather cloudy. The rain band will move southwards across Scotland, Northern Ireland and the Republic, reaching Wales and the Midlands by Saturday evening. Sunny spells and scattered showers will follow from the north, but it will turn noticeably colder. Air pollution levels are expected to remain low across the whole of the UK and Ireland on Saturday, between 1 and 3 on the Daily Air Quality Index.
The Air Quality Report, sponsored by Philips Air Purifiers.
Hello again, welcome back to the Daily Climate Show here on Sky News, and we're getting straight to discussing the climate issues of the day with the climate activist and environmental scientist Laura Young and Michael Jacobs, Professor of Political Economy at Sheffield University. Now, news that deforestation is at record levels in the Brazilian Amazon will come as no surprise, of course, to environmentalists in that country. The administration of Jair Bolsonaro has been widely criticised for allowing and even encouraging illegal logging. But Brazil signed a pledge in Glasgow to stop deforestation by 2030. So how can he be held to his promise, and how can leaders more widely be held accountable to their promises on climate action? Let's find out what our guests think. Michael, starting with you, why don't we just have a look at that pledge that leaders made at COP on deforestation? We can bring it to you now. This is what they said. We commit to working collectively to halt and reverse forest loss and land degradation by 2030. But how on earth do we get leaders of places like Brazil to stick to those pledges?
Well, of course, we don't. If by we you mean people in every other country other than Brazil. Brazilians hate it, including Brazilian environmentalists, when the rest of the world talks about our rainforest. They say, no, this is our rainforest. It's in Brazil. It's also in several other countries in Latin America. And the only way that Bolsonaro, the president of Brazil, who has shown absolutely no interest in stopping deforestation, although he signed that statement, the only way to get him to do so is Brazilian political pressure from within the country. There is quite a big environmental movement in Brazil. And of course, they have an election next year, and the principal opposition candidate, the former President Lula, has said that he will run on a platform of stopping or slowing down deforestation, eventually stopping it. So this is all about Brazilian politics. What's interesting, of course, is that he did sign that statement, President Bolsonaro. And if international agreements were really useless, he wouldn't have bothered doing so. So he clearly feels some pressure from outside, and that is the pressure that international agreements like the one that was achieved in Glasgow can achieve. They can put some pressure on, but really accountability is ultimately what politicians get from their own domestic constituencies. Yeah, we'll get Laura's thoughts on this very shortly, but quickly, Michael, what about sanctions, international sanctions? Could they not work? It's very unlikely with the current state of international politics that sanctions would be applied. We tried that before, actually, when in the first international climate agreement, the Kyoto Protocol, signed in 1997, there was a sanctions regime for countries that didn't meet their targets. They were going to be required to have stronger targets next time round. But it didn't work. Countries that didn't meet their targets, like Canada, just withdrew from the Kyoto Protocol, and so it no longer applied to them. So when it came to the Paris Climate Agreement in 2015, that regime of sanctions was abandoned. So now all we have is peer pressure, the pressure that being part of the international community and signing an agreement has on every country. And you might think that's very weak, and at one level it is. But at another level, the Paris Climate Agreement told countries to come back 5 years later with stronger commitments, and they all did so, including Brazil. Okay. So it does have some impact, even though there is no legal sanction. Yeah, well, those figures, Laura, are really distressing today, aren't they? Deforestation in Brazil up 22% since last year, its highest level since 2006. Let's have a look at what Greenpeace had to say today. We can show you that. If anyone believed Bolsonaro's government's empty promises at COP, the truth is in those numbers. What about people power, Laura? That's what I want to talk to you about, because you're a climate activist. How important is that in making a difference, making leaders accountable?
So important. It's one of the really important things we can do as individuals, to talk to our local government representatives. For me, up here in Glasgow, that's my MSP, my MP, all the way up, and to really try and push from the bottom. I loved that analogy of kind of peer pressure from around the world as well, because although the Amazon is vital, it's the lungs of the earth, and we all need to be doing a bit to protecting it, we can set a global standard for forestry, and that's something that we can look at here within the UK as well. We can ask our elected leaders, how are we leading the way with deforestation, bringing that back, and also afforestation, putting more forests in, and that's something we can talk to our local representatives about to push the change, to hopefully make our leaders of the UK influence global leaders as well.
Other people that can influence, of course, are celebrities, high-profile figures. Laura, I know you were up in Glasgow. I don't know if you got a chance to meet Leonardo DiCaprio when you were there. Do you welcome people like him, those sort of people with huge star power coming in and getting involved in climate action?
I think it's great. The more the merrier who are inside the climate movement. You know, any person can be a climate activist, and we need people from all walks of life to do climate activism in their own way. There was a lot of fuss around some celebrities coming to COP26, and I guess in one breath, I would say that it did take some airtime away from really important voices who weren't necessarily represented at this COP. Young people, Indigenous people, people from marginalised communities. And so I think there's definitely a role for celebrities to play in the climate movement. It might not just necessarily be front and centre taking up time at these conferences, but I would encourage more celebrities to get on board and to talk about this, but also to really walk the walk when it comes to climate action. I think one of the biggest criticisms for celebrities jumping on board is the hypocrisy, and it's about how we can encourage them to do better individually, but also use their sphere of influence to encourage business and government to come along with us as well.
Yeah, good point. We've been following Prince Charles in Egypt over the last few days, Michael. British royals obviously traditionally don't get involved in politics, but are the rules different when it comes to climate change, do you think?
Well, yes and no. So Prince Charles has been very active on environmental issues in general and climate change in particular for quite a few years. And by and large, he's not had the kinds of criticism for doing that he has in some of the other areas where he's intervened, like architecture and planning, where he's been more criticised. And that is because, in general, environmental concern is cross-party. I think as somebody who works in a politics department, I know that many people who work on constitutional matters are concerned about this. Yes, climate change and environment is a generally popular clause, but in principle, when you have a hereditary monarch, or in this case, the heir to the monarch, the point is that they don't get involved in politics. And, you know, one of the things we always say about the Queen is how remarkable it is that she's been on the throne for all this time, and we really don't know what her political views are because she has kept them to herself. And the fact that we have a new, the heir to the throne, who will presumably be monarch fairly soon, whom we know his views about many issues, of which this is just one, I think worries a lot of people who study the constitutional question. But on climate, he's been a force of good. I don't think he's the greatest influencer on TikTok, but he has been important in convening business leaders, political leaders and others to discuss this. And so in that sense, he has played a positive role.
Yeah, and he said he won't be a meddling monarch, so he may tone things down a bit when he finally becomes king. And just 10 seconds, Laura, really, do you think Prince William, do you think young people listen to him when he talks about green issues?
More so than other people, so that's a good thing.
All right, great. Really good speaking to you both. Thank you very much indeed. Michael Jacobs, Laura Young, always good to talk to you. Have a good weekend. And don't forget, you can download and listen to ClimateCast wherever you get your podcasts from. This week, Ashton Hurinag gets two very different views on the Glasgow Climate Agreement from George Monbiot and Seppi Golzari-Monroe. And that is everything from us for today. But do stay tuned, because coming up next, 18-year-old Kyle Rittenhouse found not guilty on all counts and acquitted for the shooting of 3 men. That's the latest in a couple of minutes.